following is intended only for mature audiences.
Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Now, here's your host. It's Jmann. Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
Hello there.
I want to talk about the situation with Kaylee Gain. Fucking Google it if you haven't heard about this. Hazelwood East High School, St. Louis County, Missouri. There was a fight that broke out, and the reason I originally saw this shit is it was on Twitter, because I'm subscribed to a bunch of pages of like crazy videos and fights breaking out and shit. And you see this melee, and there's a black girl beating the shit out of a white girl, and then she spins her around, lays her on her back, punches her twice in the face, grabs her by the hair, and then lifts up her head and smashes it repeatedly into the fucking concrete. That was on March 8th. So the girl who got her head smashed against the concrete suffered a fractured skull and was in a coma for 22 fucking days.
Okay.
And when she woke up, she could barely communicate. She's learning to have to talk again and walk again.
Holy shit!
And why this is important is I keep doing episodes on stories about kids and crime. Now, the assailant is 15 years old, and they are thinking of trying to charge her as an adult.
Oh, okay.
So I showed you the video.
Yes.
Now, having that in mind, that having one student smash another student's head, lift it, and then drive it into the concrete at least 3 fucking times, right. Would you be okay if they charged the girl that did it as an adult?
You see, that's hard because when you see the evidence of it, when you see the video, I think the initial reaction is say, well, yeah, she should be charged. I've always had a gray area with this, to be honest with you. You're not an adult, but I don't feel like you should still be free of all penalties until you're 18. You know, I think that's ridiculous as well, even though you have the size of an adult, obviously the capacity of an adult, in this case, to smash this girl's head against the concrete, right, and cause this much damage. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is for that one. I don't know if I'm okay with it or not.
Well, it's going to be, let's say that this happened in Minnesota. I would argue that it would be at least a third-degree assault. It would be a gross misdemeanor.
Right.
And you would argue that it was substantial bodily harm due to the fact that she's going to have reduced cognitive faculties for at least a short term and possibly going forward. And that's what the threshold is for how they charge you. What is the injury, right. And is it going to be permanently debilitating? Like, even if you knock somebody's tooth out, that's a permanent condition.
Right.
So
even if they can get a fake one in there or something, you know, doesn't matter. Yeah, it's irreparable.
And the thing about the fight is it didn't have to go there. She could have just kept punching her, but none of these other kids are pulling the one black girl off the white girl. And maybe part of that is what I heard is that there was a dust-up between these two the day before in school.
Okay.
The subject matter of which they're not going to tell us due to data privacy.
But you just showed me the video, and in that video, that accelerates quickly, right? She goes from throwing the girl down, and the girl is kicking back, punching back, and she's on top of her, beating her. And all of a sudden, it just turns to where she somehow mounts her, gets on top of her, and just starts slamming her head. And you're right, nobody jumps in right away, but even the camera turns away. And it looked like the end of the video, other people were like
fighting with the girl that was doing it. And it seems like it was a group of people kind of going at each other. But the thing about that the parents have alluded to, and when I say the parents, I mean the parents of the girl that did the assault.
Yes.
They say that this is not a good judge of her character, that she's an honor student and she keeps to herself and she's mercilessly bullied, which adds a new wrinkle to it. Like, sure. Did you get what you deserved to an extent? Getting your ass beat, not having your fucking skull smashed and fractured.
But this girl snapped, right? Obviously. Right.
So, like, a lot of kids, like Columbine is the most prominent example of kids being teased mercilessly and then deciding enough is enough, right. And then they fucking go into the school and shoot I forget how many people.
Right. And you see, that was why I hesitated on the whole charging a 15-year-old as an adult, right? This, obviously, the capacity for harm is there, but also the ability to learn from a mistake. You know what I mean? If this girl was an honor student, all these things, other factors in. Now, we don't know, right? We want to have compassion on one hand, but you see the video and it's like, geez.
Oh, it's fucking brutal, and I have zero compassion for the girl that did it, who's in custody, and if they charge her as an adult, because one could argue that the first time she cracked her head on the cement, there's a fucking sound. It wasn't in the video version that I showed you. Because there's some AI YouTube bot fucking describing what's going on in somewhat of the story. But in the original video on Twitter, which I'd have to dig to find, but point being, you hear the skull smashing on the concrete. Yeah. It's fucking horrible.
Oh, yeah.
And I would argue that if you're doing that and you're 15, you A, know right from wrong. You B, know that this is enough to seriously injure somebody. So C, charge her as an adult, because that could be considered attempted murder. And if she would have died, they would have at least got her on a manslaughter charge, because you didn't intend to kill, but it happened anyway through negligence to protect the person who you were assaulting.
Well, that's the thing. You know what I mean? At what point does she realize what she's done or gone too far? Or did she have that capacity? That was my thought as I watched the video, was like, was she going to slow down or stop at all?
But the phone camera turns, so you can't see if somebody pulled her off of her.
And the other thing you said, or I think was mentioned, or maybe you didn't mention it here yet, was that the parents said that she was acting in self-defense.
Yeah, and that's the next point I wanted to bring up. They said she was acting in self-defense, and I don't know how you can claim self-defense when the entirety of the video shows the assailant grabbing the other girl, shoving her down, punching her repeatedly in the head, picking her up, swinging her around, and then slamming her head. How the fuck are you defending yourself? You're at no point out of control. You are completely in control of the physicality of this Donnybrook, the entirety of what we see.
Right. And a lot of the law is based on what a reasonable person would do in these circumstances, right? And so you are allowed to defend yourself to an extent. Obviously, everybody would justify it, but when you start becoming the aggressor, when you take it too far, there's a whole point where it's too much. Now, if somebody was coming at me with a gun and doing some kind of jujitsu, you break their arm, right? So they can't fire that gun.
Yeah.
Is that assault on you then? I mean, is that still you defending yourself? Because they could have still gotten that gun and still used that hand or that arm to kill you or shoot you with it. I don't know. There's all sorts of legal gray areas, but honestly, that was way too much. There's no way I think you can claim self-defense on that. I mean, there's just no way.
So the family of Kaylee Gain set up a GoFundMe to help for her hospital bills, of which they got $400,000.
Oh, sure.
And then the family of the assaulter set up a GoFundMe for her legal fees, which got about $3,400 before GoFundMe shut it down because you cannot use their service to fund criminal defense of violent crimes. It's in their policies and such.
Was it even getting much money, though?
Well, $3,400. You have to think that who in their right fucking mind is going to donate to your criminal defense if that's what you did? And it's very public and nationally televised.
The people who haven't seen the video yet and just hear about this girl was defending herself from a white girl and something happened and now she's
probably
being persecuted, right? People will selectively tell a story to get a certain narrative going, and that's probably it. I'm guaranteeing you that there's people that have been kind of duped into it because they don't know all the information.
Well, the other thing I thought was it must be family friends that are just supporting someone that they know.
True.
And at a certain point, you have to say, you're my friend, but no. Yeah. Sorry, your fucking kid's on their own on this one, and I'm not backing you. I'm not going to speak. I don't care if she's an honor student and she's, a teacher's pet and all that shit. All of that is completely gone away when you commit this act. If that was my kid, fuck you. No.
Right.
There's no defense for that. I don't give a shit if my kid was bullying you. I mean, I'm going to be mad at them for doing it. But at the same time, even if you're defending yourself, there was a line and you didn't just cross it. You hopped over and ran.
Right.
Ground and pound is one thing. Getting somebody in a chokehold is another thing. But the chokehold's considered lethal force because it can kill you. A ground and pound, maybe if your head's bouncing off the concrete with the punches, again, could kill you. This is clear-cut, repeated fucking blows for the back of the head to concrete.
Yeah.
Anybody who's not mentally retarded knows that that's going to cause grievous injury. And even if you want to say, oh, I didn't realize what I was doing because of the adrenaline and I was caught up in the moment, that doesn't mean shit. Because if you were not the person committing the act, if you were watching this video and it was somebody else that was doing it, I have to think that you would go, oh, that's too much. This is beyond the pale. I can't believe they went that far with it.
Well, and it is kind of the whole point of why we have a punishment system in this country. It doesn't matter who you are. If you don't have the capacity to control yourself, there's something wrong that you need to be taken away from society for a bit.
Yeah, and when I was a social worker, I had a client. I wouldn't say he had a diminished mental capacity, but he was emotionally stunted. He had a really fucked up childhood. I believe his father was in prison or something, and he had attachment issues. And basically, one time I was talking to him, I went to go see him at this school/day program because he couldn't be in regular high school. He got in too many dust-ups. And when I'm talking to him, he's telling me, he's like, man, these guys push me and I just want to fight them, but it scares the hell out of me because it's like I know that if I start a fight, if I start punching somebody, I don't think I'm going to be able to stop myself. And this was not like a huge kid, but he was also not wiry by any measure. I mean, he was husky. I mean, he could hold his own, and I'm pretty sure he could have fucking shot-putted my ass.
Right. I've heard some people say that in almost like a braggadocious kind of way. You know what I mean? Like they're that tough. But there's a difference when people actually say it and are fearful and actually mean it. You know?
The emotion in his eyes was that of basically a man-child who was scared that like someone's going to flip this switch in his head and he's going to be basically a passenger in his own body watching whatever the hell ensues unfold and then having to feel horrible after the fact. And there were some kids there that I saw in the halls that they were just bad kids went there. Kids with behavioral issues, but possibly like on the spectrum and shit would go there. And some of the ways that I heard them talk to one another, I'm like, Jesus Christ. No wonder everybody goes here because they can't fucking fit in a regular school. You sound like a maniac.
Right?
And everything about this school was multiple sets of locked glass doors to get in. If you came after first bell of the day, a security officer who was built like a brick shithouse, 6'4", probably 300 pounds, mountain of a man, would escort your ass to class.
Like you're not wandering these halls freely, huh?
Yeah. And now, here's the thing. The school is also trying to say they're not responsible for any of what happened to Kaylee Gain because it was A, after school hours, and B, outside of the building in the lot, and anybody could do anything anywhere, and it was basically in the fucking street. So they're trying to absolve themselves of any responsibility in not preventing this and then getting sued.
Well, let's go back a little bit in time. Were schools getting sued when there were fights out in the parking lot before and all this other stuff? No. I mean, I hate how this has become such a part of our society that somebody has to pay or somebody's responsible or somebody should have done more.
Just the litigious nature of everything now.
Yeah. Everybody says it, but nobody does it, right? You know what I mean? There's all this talk, all these things about the way things should be, or we should do this, or it should be this way. Fucking do it then, instead of just complaining.
So let's now put you in the scenario where you're the parent. Let's say it was your son.
My son.
And he was the one that got injured. If that was him, and then he was in the coma, obviously you're going to be pissed at the parents of the other kid, and you're going to want to sue them, but they're not going to have shit most likely. Do you sue the school? Do you feel personally that you would have grounds to sue the school?
No, because, one, look at the video. You would have had to have somebody on site within 10 feet or, 30 feet to have broken that up. Now, granted, I didn't see anything before they started entangling. I don't know if there was like a 5-minute buildup and maybe somebody should have gone out there, right? There are other parts of the story, but from what I've seen and the information I have thus far, I don't see how you could hold the school responsible.
Well, we catch the video, it starts mid-melee. So that right there, and the fact that the school's like, this is after hours.
Yeah.
And there was something the day before where it sounds like Kaylee Gain was the one who was causing some shit. And I'm not saying, oh, well, she was a bad kid the day before, so yeah, glad she got her ass beat. I mean, there's that whole fuck around and find out principle that everybody likes to quote these days.
Sure, but that would have been her getting thrown down, getting a couple punches on her head, not even one slam of the head against the concrete, right? That's not the fuck around and find out, right? That's fuck around and get put in a coma and your life changed forever. Yeah, no, there's a line to that too. I agree. I'm old school where, you know what? I grew up in a time where you opened up your mouth, you said the wrong thing, you were probably going to get punched. And that was just what happened. So
there were better days because honestly, as barbaric as it sounds that there were fights going on,
somebody could just assault you like that.
Yeah. And just you think about that, you would maybe like get 1 day of in-school suspension. You wouldn't get trespassed by the police. You wouldn't get expelled for this shit. And the point that I'm driving at here is that if you had threat of real physical pain-related consequences to shooting your mouth off too much, you get your ass beat. So you're like, I'm going to not do this. I'm not going to provoke the nerdy kid so much because eventually he's going to fucking do something about it. And then somewheres between when we were kids and 10 years later, it graduated to fucking guns coming to school.
Yeah.
And murder, as opposed to just throwing some fists and then, you know, kind of looking over your shoulder every so often the rest of the fucking year. Maybe having a couple of follow-up dust-ups at a park on a weekend or something just to finally fucking settle it. Mm-hmm. But nobody ever got fucking brain damage. And as I've mentioned, my kid's middle school, at the end of the year last year, some kid got his ass whooped. I don't know why, but he was down and they were kicking him in the head repeatedly. And there was blood on the floor and he left on a stretcher and got a TBI. Now, if it's a permanent condition, I don't know. But a TBI, basically, even I think grade 2 concussions now qualify as a TBI.
Okay.
Like when I hear traumatic brain injury, TBI, I'm thinking, permanent fucking damage going forward. But it seems like all things these days where there's this willingness to open the umbrella as far as it could possibly fucking go to cover every little instance of something semi-related and every degree of something under the sun. There's just like they're including it. But yeah, he had a fucking TBI and he did not come back to school for the rest of the year.
Okay.
He might have ended up at a different school. I don't know, but it's like, holy fucking shit.
As his parents, I would have put him in a different school, especially in this area where you have options.
And the fuck of it is that it happened during passing time. So that's when most of the fights go down at this school. There's a few that start in the lunchroom, but the majority of them, from what I have taken the observation of when she tells me when the fights happen, she's like, there's a fight and I had to run because it was too close to me. It all sounds like it's in the hallway during passing time. It's a 4 to 5 minute window.
Yep.
Teachers are half in the classroom, half out. We're talking up to 1,000 kids moving around. How the fuck do you even run through a crowd of people trying to film this shit or observe this shit and cheer them on to break it up before you get to the point where somebody's getting their head stomped or choked out? It's so fucked. And this is just another textbook example of why I did that episode that you probably haven't heard yet. There's a new Minnesota law being proposed to extend the age of what is considered juvenile in the justice system to 21.
And this is serious?
Yes. The fact that this high school assault happened in Missouri in St. Louis County, I have to believe that it's at least going to be a 70 to 80% student body of color. Because you saw what happened in Ferguson when they had those riots, is everybody, I mean, it was very black. And the victim's white, and all the other kids in the video are black, or there might have been one Latino. But everybody else in the video, except for Kaylee Gain, is a person of color. Doesn't really mean anything.
Okay.
It's basically demographic information of who we saw. But I'm just telling you, when I watch this video, there's one white person, everybody else is black, and the white person is the one getting assaulted.
If you take race out of it, and it was just two human beings beating the crap, and one beating the crap out of the other, right? You know, it could be a story that, on its merits, doesn't even need to include race, right? You know, it's hard to know this girl's motivations without knowing the conversations or what was said. You know, maybe the white girl was saying a bunch of racist stuff. Maybe not, right?
Well, I'm going to assume that if all the other kids that were there, and some of them seem to be on the white girl's side,
yeah,
if they're all black, that she just has black friends. And I doubt it was like race-based.
Right.
As much as
Right.
being a fucking smart mouth and talking shit to somebody.
Right.
And then you get what you got coming, but then they take it way too far.
Who knows if it was another person involved? Might have been about a guy or a gal at this day and age. You just don't know. So you're right. It may be completely race agnostic, this whole event. So that's hard that so many people are going to dissect it that way too. I get it. It's just a statistic. And by way of looking at the video, yes, it fits your narrative, but I don't know. I don't know if it fits or not because, again, I don't have all the information.
Well, the thing of it is when they decide how they're going to charge this crime, it's completely irrespective of race or education level or socioeconomic status. It's two people. It's an even playing field, and one drastically harmed the other.
Right. And there hasn't been any talk of comments that would imply that it was race-based. You know what I mean? Or a hate crime. There's no, you know what I mean? Normally there'd be, they're investigating it as a hate crime, right? There's been none of that, right? It was just
not that
assault.
I've heard, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. If it was, in fact, that this girl was being targeted for her whiteness, they're not going to say that on your average media outlet. I feel like Fox News would even be like, uh-oh.
Maybe you'd have to go to Tucker Carlson or the more
somebody
Newsmaxy
independent because they'd be too afraid that it would
trigger
mobilize white supremacists to be like, okay, this shit is getting to a teetering point here because it feels like we're already on the brink of like a civil war, and it's going to be blacks versus whites in the eyes of many white supremacists.
So here's what's hard about that. Do you remember a guy named Charlie Manson?
Yeah.
That was his whole deal back in the 60s. There's been talk of this forever, right?
This race war coming.
Yeah, like this pot has been bubbling and brewing and all this. And really, is it coming? Or is it going to be created, right? Like, it seems to be something we're going to make happen. If it's going to happen, it's going to be because we created it. We fomented the worst in us, keep focusing on the divisions versus the commonality. It's hard.
It's like somebody basically trying to goad us into it.
Yeah.
By constantly talking about it.
Saying it's going to happen.
Yeah. Sensationalists that want it to happen, so they're going to try to stir emotion in the right people that are ready for it, and then people that are on the fence that might know them, that it's going to radicalize them, and they'll become extremists.
Yep. Yeah. This domino effect type of thing. And just look at how emotion has been infused in our politics within the last 24 years and how well that's worked out in the last few election cycles and how, just back and forth.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So I'm anxious to see when this finally comes down to charges. I mean, I would think that they have to, they would have filed charges with something similar to our 3648 rule in this state, where you have 36 hours to file charges and 48 hours, not counting weekends and holidays, to go before a judge. But now it's a matter of, is the court going to escalate it to adult level charges, where I would think all sense would be, worst case scenario, this girl goes to prison for years, right? She does her time in the Juvie facility till she's 18, and then they bus her up to big girl prison.
What would that charge? I suppose we don't know what that charge be and what the sentencing guidelines on something like that would be.
Well, they'd look at the fact that she probably has no priors. It sounds like, based on what the family is saying. And I don't know how they think they could get away with covering up if their daughter had some juvenile criminal record.
Yeah. And, I was going to say, if these were manslaughter charges, like if the girl died, and like you said, it was upgraded to manslaughter, what's that, 10, 15 years? So where would you go down for,
I think they'd start at 5.
Yeah.
And anything less than 10, people would go, fuck you.
Well, that's what I was wondering, what, kind of the ballpark guidelines might be on something like that.
Well, let me just do a little fucking... Second-degree involuntary manslaughter is a Class D felony in Missouri. Consequences include a fine of up to $5,000 and up to 4 years in prison. For first-degree involuntary manslaughter, penalties increase to up to 15 years in prison with a fine of up to $5,000. So I would say that it would be second-degree, because second-degree is typically for when you're failing to act with due care and through neglect to stop yourself or prevent the harm is when they die. That's why when, George Floyd died, they tacked on both murder and manslaughter charges because like, well, we can charge both and one of them's going to stick. Either way, we're going to get you.
Yeah.
I don't think they go with murder because...
So maybe up to 7 to 8 years then, maybe.
Maybe.
For, secondary or something.
They'll try to
like that.
put it as a crime of passion. That's how I think any defense lawyer would try to say is, in the heat of the moment, she's admitting she went too far. And if she would have died, that it resulted in her death, not controlling herself, but at no time was it premeditated.
Right.
Which is the key component in which, switches between manslaughter and murder. And now I'm going to wrap this up. Interact with the show on Twitter at What Do We Call It? That is at What Do We Call It? You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/What Do We Call It podcast show. For the What Do We Call It podcast, I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
And that's the end.